There is a hidden war raging within every human soul, a silent, ceaseless clash between the selves we present to the world and the shadows we bury in shame. Carl Jung, the great cartographer of the unconscious, mapped these battlegrounds with startling clarity, warning us of the 7 behaviors that corrode not only individual lives but the very fabric of human connection. These are not mere mistakes. They are betrayals of the soul, slow-acting poisons that distort reality, fracture relationships, and chain us to illusions. Picture a man standing before a mirror, but instead of his reflection, he sees only what he wishes to see, a carefully curated image, polished and perfected. Behind the glass, however, lurks something darker, a twisted double, grinning with suppressed rage, unspoken fears, denied desires. This is the shadow, Jung's infamous spectre, and its power grows in the absence of our attention. The 7 behaviors he warns against are its weapons, tools of self-deception that allow the shadow to puppet us, masquerading as rationality, virtue, even love. To ignore these behaviors is to surrender to the unseen enemy within. They are the lies we mistake for truth, the manipulations we call strategy, the cowardice we label diplomacy. They thrive in the unexamined life, in the refusal to look inward. But Jung's message is not one of condemnation, it is a call to arms. By naming these behaviors, he hands us a lantern, illuminating the path back to wholeness. This is not psychology, it is alchemy. The base metals of our unconscious impulses can be transmuted into gold, but only if we dare to face them. The journey begins with recognition. The war ends with integration. Jung's warnings about these 7 behaviors are not arbitrary moral decrees but revelations of psychic laws, principles as immutable as gravity, as consequential as the tides. They emerge from the foundational belief that what we deny in ourselves does not vanish, it metastasizes. The first of these forbidden behaviors is the refusal to acknowledge one's shadow, the act of projecting our flaws onto others while clinging to an illusion of purity. This is the great sin of self-avoidance, a kind of spiritual tax evasion where we hoard the pleasant and disown the painful, leaving the soul unbalanced. Closely linked is the tyranny of the persona, the mask we mistake for our true face. Society rewards the polished exterior, the curated self, but Jung saw this as a slow suicide of authenticity. When the persona grows too rigid, it becomes a sarcophagus, entombing the wild, creative, and unpredictable aspects of the self that are essential for growth. Another corrosive behavior is the manipulation of others under the guise of love or help, a particularly insidious shadow tactic where control masquerades as care. This is the wolf of domination wearing the fleece of compassion, and it starves both giver and receiver of genuine connection. Then there is the cowardice of spiritual bypassing, the use of lofty ideals or vague mysticism to evade necessary earthly struggles. Jung warned against those who seek enlightenment as an escape from humanity, not a deeper engagement with it. Similarly, the arrogance of certainty, the refusal to admit doubt, ambiguity, or the limits of one's knowledge, creates a brittle psyche, one that shatters when reality inevitably contradicts its dogma. Perhaps most dangerous is the stagnation of comfort, the passive acceptance of a life half-lived. Jung saw this as a betrayal of the self with a capital S, the divine spark within that demands growth, risk, and occasional chaos. Finally, there is the exploitation of power without wisdom, the use of strength to dominate rather than elevate. This, Jung argued, is the shadow's ultimate triumph, when the gifts meant for creation are twisted into tools of destruction. These behaviors are not mere personal failings. They are the rot in the foundations of civilizations, the reason empires crumble and relationships wither. They are the blind spots in the collective psyche, passed down like cursed heirlooms. Yet Jung's message is not despair but urgency. To recognize these patterns is to begin the alchemical work of turning lead into gold, not through perfection, but through ruthless, compassionate honesty. Beneath the surface of Jung's warnings lies a tapestry of ancient stories, dreams, and archetypes that give form to these psychological truths. Consider the Greek myth of Narcissus, not merely as a cautionary tale about vanity, but as a parable of the persona's deadly allure. Enraptured by his own reflection, Narcissus becomes trapped in a static image of himself, a perfect metaphor for the tyranny of self-presentation that Jung warns against. The pool becomes a prison of his own making, and the tragedy is not his admiration of beauty, but his inability to see beyond it. What drowns him is not water, but the refusal to acknowledge the depths beneath the surface. Then there is the alchemical tradition, where the nigredo, the blackening, the decay, was not a failure but a necessary stage of transformation. Jung saw in this process a profound truth about the shadow, that darkness is not the enemy, but the raw material of enlightenment. To refuse it is like an alchemist rejecting the prima materia, ensuring the work can never begin. The 7 behaviors are variations of this refusal, attempts to skip the descent into the underworld where true gold is forged. Eastern traditions offer the story of the Buddha's confrontation with Mara, the demon of illusion, on the night of his awakening. Mara does not attack with weapons, but with temptations, doubt, fear, the seduction of certainty, the lure of comfort. Each mirrors one of Jung's unacceptable behaviors, dressed in the robes of rationality or virtue. The Buddha's victory comes not through destruction, but by touching the earth, grounding himself in reality. This is the essence of Jung's warning, that every psychological battle is won not by escaping the self, but by fully inhabiting it. Even fairy tales whisper these truths. The witch who offers poisoned apples in the guise of gifts, the kings who rule through fear rather than wisdom, the sleeping princesses who represent dormant potential, all are shadows made visible. These stories endure because they are not mere fantasies, but maps of the interior world. When Jung speaks of the behaviors we must not tolerate, he is pointing to the dragons that guard our deepest treasures. To slay them is not the goal. To understand them is the key. To engage with Jung's warnings is not merely to contemplate abstract psychological principles, but to undertake a revolution in how we move through the world. The first step is ruthless self-observation, not the sterile dissection of a laboratory scientist, but the attentive gaze of a gardener who knows that even weeds have roots worth understanding. When we feel the impulse to disguise control as concern, or when we detect the familiar comfort of blaming others for what irritates us in ourselves, these are the moments where transformation becomes possible. The key lies not in self-condemnation, but in developing what Jung called the watchful eye, that quiet inner witness that notices without immediately judging. In relationships, this work takes on urgent significance. How often do we demand that partners, friends, or colleagues carry the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge? The man who claims to value independence but secretly resents his partner's autonomy, the leader who preaches equality while hoarding power, these are not hypocrisies to shame, but invitations to explore the disowned self. The practice here is to catch projection in the act, to pause when irritation flares and ask, where does this live in me? This simple question, consistently applied, begins to dissolve the illusions that keep us from authentic connection. The professional sphere reveals another layer of application. Consider how often organizational dysfunction stems from the very behaviors Jung warned against. The leader who cannot tolerate doubt, the team that mistakes harmony for truth, the visionary who bypasses practical steps in favor of grand gestures. To bring Jung's insights into these spaces is not to psychoanalyze colleagues, but to model a different way of being. One where uncertainty is admitted, shadows are named, and the difficult questions are given space to breathe. The most transformative leaders are not those without shadows, but those who know how to work with them. Even societal challenges come into sharper focus through this lens. Polarization, conspiracy theories, the demonization of opposing groups, all can be seen as mass manifestations of an integrated shadows. When a culture rewards the persona and punishes authenticity, when it encourages the projection of collective fears onto convenient scapegoats, it becomes a hall of mirrors where reality dissolves. The antidote begins at the individual level, with the courage to tolerate complexity, to hold multiple truths, to resist the seduction of simplistic narratives. Jung's map of unacceptable behaviors is ultimately a guide back to wholeness, not the false wholeness of perfection, but the dynamic integrity of a self in constant dialogue with its depths. This is not a journey with a final destination, but a spiral path where each revolution reveals new layers to integrate. The call is not to become flawless, but to become fluid, not to eliminate the shadow, but to dance with it consciously. The work demands everything and offers more. The weight of self-knowledge balanced by the liberation of truth, the discomfort of growth paired with the vitality of authentic existence. To heed Jung's warnings is to step out of the audience and onto the stage of your own life, no longer a passive spectator to your patterns, but an active participant in your unfolding. The 7 behaviors are not sins to confess, but sirens to navigate. Their songs alerting us to the rocks of unconsciousness, their warnings steering us toward open waters. The question that remains is not whether we have these shadows, but what we will do with them. Will we leave them to pull our strings from backstage, or bring them into the light where they can transform from tyrants to teachers? The choice is ours, moment by moment, day by day. The alchemical vessel is not some distant laboratory, but the raw material of our daily lives. Every conflict, every relationship, every quiet hour with ourselves. The gold is there, waiting in the dross. All that's missing is our willingness to begin.